And welcome back as we continue our journey in making this game. Before we go ahead and start adding more code into our program, we first need to have a little bit of discussion about implementing methods. If you recall, we are using methods when our program. These are blocks of code that act as functions, and again, we refer to these as methods. And when methods exist, the first thing we have to understand is that they first have to be declared and therefore defined within our code someplace. And then in order to just use those methods, we have to later then call or invoke them when we want that block of code to be executed. So how are methods composed? How do we actually go about writing methods? Well, methods have three parts. They'll have a return type, so whether that's like void, string, whatever. They'll have a name, and they'll have some type of parameters. So here's an example method. It's called void do something. If we look at the return type, that's always the first part. That is, in this case, void. Void simply just means there's no return type. If we see the name of this method, well, we can look at the next chunk of text there, and we'll see that the name is do something. Now, the parameters are always going to be whatever is inside the parentheses. So these are the parameters, and the things that comprise parameters are what we refer to as arguments. But in this example, you'll notice that there's nothing in those parentheses. So in this case, there are no parameters. Now, sometimes you'll also see methods that have what are referred to as access modifiers. And these will sometimes be things such as public or private, and we'll simply see this listed first. This will come before the return type. Not always is it going to be there. It's not something you see, but if you do come across it, know that it's simply just changing the access of that code elsewhere in the program. Now, let's talk about those return types for just a second. Because when methods are of type void, nothing is returned. All right? And when we say return, that means that it's going to give some type of value that the program can do elsewhere with. But if it's void, that just means the code is going to be executed as is. So, for example, if I had a void method that would do something, let's say, add two numbers and then print out the result. Well, that print out the result is probably the last thing I needed to do, and so I don't need it to go ahead and do another step value. But when we have methods that are of a return type, let's say, for example, type string, well, then what was going to happen is that we're going to get a value returned of that type. So, for example, if I have a method called string get name, well, that's going to return a value of type string, because string is the return type that is for that method. Get name is the name, and here we have no parameters. Now, talking about parameters, if we look at that last method, we saw we have, again, empty parameters, or just an open and closed parenthesis. That means that we don't need any additional information in order to call and use that method. Now, when we do have something inside the parentheses, it simply just means that we need additional information in order to execute that code. So let's look at this example here. Void add two nums, int num1, num2. Void is, of course, the return type. So that means we're not expecting something to be processed elsewhere in the program, but it's telling us we want to add two nums. And in here, it's taking in two parameters. We have int num1, int num2. Int num1 is what we refer to as the first argument. Int num2 would be the second argument. Now, also, we don't see the code here of this method, but we can still see that it has two parameters. So let's talk about the other half of this coin, which is calling these methods. Well, methods on their own. If you just stick a method in your program, let's say you put like get name in there, it's not going to execute on its own unless that method, get name, is called or invoked by code somewhere else in our program. So let's go back and look at our method string get name. The method in its full entirety might look something like this. Public string get name, return name. And you notice we signify the beginning and end of a method always here with these curly brackets. All right. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Anything that wants to belong to that method has to go in between these curly brackets. And of course here we have a return type of string, which means that we are going to expect a string to come back. So that means this variable name should be a string variable. Now, if I want to actually call this method somewhere within my program, so let's just say we want to put this in our update method? Well, the call to get name is going to just be the name of the method. In this case, get name. Now, if I had a method that had parameters in it, then obviously I would need to also supply arguments for those parameters in order for that method to execute. Otherwise, I'm probably going to run into some errors. And the last thing to really kind of focus in on here is that we've already seen two methods so far in Unity in this 3D version of course. You, of course, might remember methods from when, if you did my Game is one course, and you saw some of the 2D methods that we did there. But let's pop over to our code to actually look at the start and update method and contrast those just a little bit. All right, so here we, of course, have the start and update method within our code. And one of the things you'll notice is that there is a supplied comment that kind of tells us the difference between start and update. Here it says start is called once before the execution of update after the model behavior is created, and here it says update is called once per frame. So what that tells us is that start runs simply once, and it is one of the very first things that is executed. It's not the first thing, because there is, of course, other things in Unity's hierarchy, but start is one of those first things that gets called. Whereas update is something that continuously gets called. Now you'll notice that the return type on both of these methods is void, because they're not looking to spit something back out for additional calculations. They're saying, hey, just run this code as you see it. In this case, if we look at our start method right now, there's nothing in here. But our update method is what's, in this case, allowing us to continuously change the position of that player object through our float X position, Y position, and of course our Z position. And then we translate that using the transform command. Another thing to keep in mind here, though, is as we start adding methods to our code. All right, let me just go ahead and create a quick one here, and just for your demonstration purposes, I'm going to create a, let's just say a void method. So void, let's say, we'll call this one test method. And I'm just going to have this one simply write out to our console, so debug.log. And I'm just going to have it say, I am a method. Just so you can see how this works. And test method right now, if I were to go back into Unity and run my code, if we look at our console, we will not see this. All right, so here I am. Here's my console. You can see right now it's empty. If I press play, even if I move around my player and getting that update command going, there's nothing appearing in my console. But if I take this test method right here, and let's just say I have it get called when I start my program. So I'm just going to put test method in here, and I'm going to make sure my code is saved. So now when I go ahead and press run, you can see we get the message, I am a method. And you notice it doesn't continuously happen. We only get one occurrence of it because it's in the start method. If I were to put this in the update method, then obviously we would have this message continuously being printed. But I think that's a good introduction for us and recap of methods. So next time we can actually go ahead and start using these methods to actually start affecting our game.